Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. I will cover the hottest spots on the front line very briefly today, mostly because I covered them in details in the previous two updates, so you should go watch those. But today I want to more focus on the things that are surrounding the front line, the other parts of the front line, and matters that we need to discuss about this war that I think were not discussed in details enough. So first things first, what is happening in Avdiivka? Russians are continuing their attacks, and right now the reports are that they're having somewhat success in the area of this railway, and they're having success at the Terikon, which people corrected me is not really a waste heap, it's more like a slag heap from all of the refining and excavation and so on, which is totally fine. This is how Ukrainian attack would look like in the Ukrainian offensive if they would use the Russian tactics and they would just try to charge no matter the losses. And losses that Russia is sustaining are significant. I finally found some kind of numbers that I can relate to, because sometimes it was mostly propaganda numbers, like of 100 Russians, only like 2 make it to Ukrainian trenches, and it's just unrealistic. The real numbers that I can finally confirm is about 30% of Russians that are attacking Ukrainian positions survive and make it to Ukrainian trenches. So it's not as devastating as, well, I mean, let's put it this way. It's devastating for any other army. It's devastating for anyone that values human life. It's completely atrocious to be in that military that says 70% of you will die, but 30 of you will make it to the enemy positions, and then you will get into the hand-to-hand combat. But this is how Russians are fighting right now. So despite all of the best defenses that Ukraine is putting, there are these 30% of Russians that are still making it to their positions. So this is something that we need to keep in mind, and it is not a walk in a park for Ukrainian soldiers. They are still being shot at, they're still being killed, they're still being killed in combat. It's a tragedy. We are talking here, whenever we're discussing this situation of war, about like a global situation, like how threatening it is for Ukraine, because when you zoom out, like Russia wants to take over Ukraine, or at least Kiev, right? And then we're talking Avdiivka, it's like this small spot on the map. It's basically nothing. But for every single warrior on the front lines, it's his friends that are dying. It's people that he shared the food with. It's people that spent the last year and a half in the same trenches together. It's incredible loss for every single person, and it's an incredible personal tragedy for every single warrior on the front lines in Ukraine as well. So let's not take it lightly, like it's a walk in a park for Ukrainians. It is not. It's a very tough fight with a lot of drama behind it. But additional drama is developing on the northern direction. Here, Russians try to put some kind of efforts into advancing, and for a couple of days we had reports that they are succeeding around Orlyanka over here, and that they are succeeding around or not succeeding, but like trying to fight some around Sinkivka, and there was another, around Novohorivka. So while Russians did indeed advance a little bit, after that we received proofs by the Ukrainian Kraken unit that they actually, on the main parts of the Russian attacks, it was the Kraken units and other Ukrainian armed forces units. They attacked, they stopped Russian offensive. Go watch the Kraken channel, I will link it in the description, and you will see just how sharply and absolutely devastating for Russians this attack by Kraken units was. It's also serious battle that is happening on that area, and while there is not a lot of information that is coming out of that direction, the information that came out from Kraken units just shows that it's actual fighting, actual real serious combat that is happening over there. We should not underestimate it. And again, it's a great thing to underline that while the map doesn't move, it doesn't mean that there is no battle that is happening. There are still people fighting. Another part of the front line that we need to talk about is Bakhmut. Here, Ukrainians are now very nicely reinforced themselves behind the railway line, and they are advancing. Especially, we've heard successes from the Klishivka towards Opitne direction, which is nice. However, Russians are trying to put some kind of pressure to Ukrainians attacking from the north. These are all only pressure attacks. They are made so Ukrainians don't disengage their forces from the area. This is all planned, so be aware of this. There might be some changes on the map again, but this is not primary attack. This is more of a just a fixing attacks for Russians. And then we can transition to something more of a discussion. Remember, if you like what's happening on this channel, you're very welcome to support it on Buy Me a Coffee. But more importantly is for you to support the Ukrainian armed forces. Links in the first comment to do so. Please support the Ukrainian armed forces. But the situation in Avdiivka is very interesting. Russian Telegram channels, I think the most interesting one was one person, because they are on Putin's payroll. And that person was describing that situation with those 70% losses that we're talking about, that Russians need to really rethink how they're fighting, which is hilarious because, as I said, this is like a ritual for them, where every time Russians are doing something, they're then starting reporting, oh my God, how bad things are, because it's actually terrible. We've seen all of the videos. Our Discord channel with the not safe for work parts, videos are just blowing up with all those videos of Russians being crushed. And he's developing this analysis of saying how Russians should fight. So they are stating that Russians should destroy Ukrainian anti-air assets, then Russian aviation need to come in and take over the control of the sky, then destroy Ukrainian fortifications, push back their artillery, and only then the armored columns that are not walking as a columns but more of a mixed group with the spread around the movements, they should assault Ukrainian positions, and then vehicles shouldn't just drop off the infantry and drive away, but rather stay and support the Russians, which is a great fantasy imagination on how Russians think they should fight. The problem is that we are already seeing for a longer time. I was telling you about that we're seeing the degradation of Russian force, and one of the major problems that Russians are having is they don't have sufficiently trained junior officer corps, and that's the problem. So what Russia is doing right now, how Russia is fighting right now, is a consequence of that, is a consequence of attrition. The maneuvers that Russia are executing, it cannot do very difficult maneuvers. The same way that I was talking to you about a couple of videos ago, that Russian aviation has been dumbed down to account for more inexperienced pilots just to kind of fly in and drop bombs and then fly away, to not execute any kind of multi-wing approaches. The same way Russian attacks have been dumbed down. I know they've never been too smart in their approaches, but what they are doing right now is they are simplifying the attack protocols to make sure that even the basic commanders can execute them. They are not trying to coordinate the forces. They are not trying to try to have some kind of very difficult doctrine. They are dumbing everything down and just going there. So like a column moves in, certain parts of the column, like you guys says, you guys, after you drive up, you drive away, and then you guys drop things on the ground and then get out. That's it. That's their modus operandi. They are not really coordinating those attacks massively. What they're doing is just trying to attack those parts of the front line where they have success, and then try to repeat it again and again and again, suffering horrendous casualties. But that's how they're fighting, and that's their current new doctrine. Made sure that even if they sustain casualties in the officer corps, they will still continue advancing. Some other things that we need to talk about is that Biden made a speech of supporting Israel and Ukraine and Taiwan, and he proposed to Congress that more than $100 billion support package should be accepted. But I think one of the most important things of that speech was that he spoken the words that I was hoping people in the Western world would start speaking. Those that were underlying that it was not money that is being sent to Ukraine, that money that is in that package is actually going for the most part to the American producers of weaponry, whereas all their weapons are being sent from US to Ukraine to make sure Ukraine continues fighting, but it's actually money that being invested in US in those labor intensive work where people were really looking forward. Like I believe there was some kind of issues in US where people that are not middle class, the working class people, just were lacking some jobs. And I think working for this good noble cause for defense industry to make US stronger is an amazing investment for US population. So I'm very grateful to Biden that he actually spoke those words out loud, because it was my big frustration that it was very rarely spoken. And I'm now hoping that the same words, the same phrases, the same statements will appear within European powers as well. Then there was the explosion on the Baltic pipeline, where the main perpetrator right now is assessed to be Russia. I mean, it's not really a secret. Apparently, they found some kind of a submarine that was operating in the area. There was also potentially some Chinese ship. It's now like being investigated, but it's more of a, we know who did it. And now it's about whether or not Nordics and Baltics can agree to close down the Baltic Sea from Russians. If they do, that would be a major blow for Russian exports. That would be a major blow for the Kaliningrad and what kind of weapons Russia will be able to get there. In any case, I'm really hoping that EU will support the decision of Estonia and Finland if they will find their balls and actually stand up to Russia harassing and destroying their infrastructure. Because this is a direct threat, and we need to respond to direct threat of Russians very decisively and stand against it. Then one topic that kind of I was always wanted to talk about, but always escaped because the news were always so important, is the Russian economy. Now, for the next year, you're pretty sure everyone has heard that Russia has put in a lot of investment into their military, that almost tripled their military budget. It's an incredible increase. My problem is that this is a fantasy budget. Like all of the actual analysts about the Russian economy, they are stating that a lot of it is very fantasy-based assumptions, because their budget has been already struggling. There are problems with Russian taxation, there are problems with Russian society, there are problems within Russian industries, and in their next budget, they're setting it suddenly next year a huge 30% income target. So suddenly their income for their government increases by 30%. Where does it come from? How? Don't know. But this is what they're planning for their budget, and it's a big question if they will be able to put it all together to make it work. Military is becoming a priority, and everything else is becoming secondary. And on one side, for us, it's obviously problematic. It's basically Russia stating that it's going to be war and we're going to be focusing on war. The problem is that this also kills the business activity and business desire to do anything in Russia. Because if there is not going to be any normalization with the markets, if there is not going to be any normalization with the world, and mostly it's going to be just more war, and we're going to do more war because that's the message that this budget is sending, it's really not that cheering up. So unless the company is just basically a monopolist on the Russian market, which a lot of the big Western companies inside of Russia are, and they're just getting over profits because there is no substitution within Russia for that. Russian budget is not very investment friendly, especially because they are continuing raising the interest rate. And that means that it's becoming more and more expensive to take out loans. Loans are crucial for growing any kind of business because the bank interest rate that Russian central banks puts, it's just for other banks to use. But banks will need to make some kind of a profit as well for themselves. So they will put additional their own interest on top of the bank stated interest. And that means there's going to be some kind of like 20, even 25 some places interest rate. Obviously, very little companies would want to try to invest and in growth, especially if we're not talking about these monopoly based companies, but more of a smaller ones. This kills investment, this kills Russian economy, this kills growth for any kind of mid to long-term perspective for Russia. What is interesting is the car market in Russia, because sales of cars were shifted from Russian and European cars to Chinese with a scale of 90% of those, which means that China is very quickly becoming the monopoly car sales country in Russia, which in itself for us, it doesn't tell us a lot, but it's an interesting breaking of this Russian dream of self-sustaining economy where they would have their internal car production, car manufacturing rise up as the European markets would go away. Instead, we see Chinese selling their cars to Russian market, and 90% of the cars being bought are Chinese. Even Russian notable figures within the economy, like the pro-Russian, the ones that are representing Russia itself, they're stating that China is not really being a big friend of Russians. They're selling their products to Russia double or even triple the price of what they would charge to other places in the world. And when approached to Chinese manufacturers, whether or not they would sell components to produce stuff in Russia, they're saying, sure, buy our components 10 times the price. So it becomes very quickly not rentable for you to buy these expensive components to build something in Russia, and Chinese companies and Chinese producers are abusing Russian state of affairs to make profits and make sure that they are just buying their end products, that Russia is not developing their own production. China is literally targeting, killing, and making sure that Russia is becoming their resource cow and their consumer market, which is really, really bad news for Russia, once again, on the economic front line. And Putin is also not getting in good relationships with China. He went to China with big hopes just recently. He went to China to try to secure two major things. First, to see if there would be any kind of additional possibilities to set up trade, maybe additional weapons to Russia, which failed completely. And then the second part, he wanted to convince Chinese that he wants to build another pipe to China. And again, he received a very hard no from China. They don't want to invest in Russia. They want to milk Russians dry, and that's exactly what they're doing. And we should be very glad that China is definitely playing on the Chinese team here rather than on the Russian team. And I believe this was one of the things that drove Putin to this weird state in which he approached the decision that he wanted to have Donbass in his control, that they needed to storm Avdiivka. So in this case, we're seeing how these economic and all of the losses on the Chinese, on the Eastern Front for Russia, are now being translated for them to try to maybe edge some kind of a military victory at any cost. In any case, thank you so much for watching this video. I'm glad that I was finally able to talk to you about these things. I love you all. Thank you so much to moderators. Support this channel, support Ukraine. Slava Ukraini, and I'll see you guys next time.